All right, good morning. You should be able to hear us from the conference room mic now. Just a quick reminder, we are recording the meeting and I'm doing a quick verification. I'm not quite sure we're at quorum yet. So. Miss Brad Kerstetter and Lisa Dooley on the first count, so it looks like we do have a quorum.
Jim, this is Steve Phillips. I just want to make sure you got me logged in there. So
we do. We've got you logged and labeled, Mr. Phillips. So glad to have you on.
That's good. I'm glad to hear you kids are taken care of. We veteran campaigners.
Justin's here.
Mr. Saylor, this is Mark Schultz. I just joined the call.
Good morning, Mark. Glad you could join us.
Forget your name, I'm so sorry. Lauren Russell. All right, here's a packet for you that Steve sent you. Thank you.
If you're on there, just add yourself and sign in, please.
All right, the login activity has slowed down just a little bit. So we've got Mr. Juba from Rabbit Transit. All right, so Kay, just to double check and make sure you have a list of the voting members present that we see in the room. We've got Mr. Moulter, Mr. McLaughlin, and myself. Then calling in, we have Mr. Rank from District 3, Lincoln Kaufman from Snyder County, Justin Scavery from Northumberland County, Katie De Silva from Clinton County, Brad Kerstetter from Juniata County, Eric Staley from Columbia County, Lisa Dooley from the town of Bloomsburg, Mark Schultz from PennDOT District 2, and I think that's it for the voting members, but that does bring us to a total of 11, so that verifies quorum for this morning. For the purposes of the people on the phone, the other people you may see moving around the room in the screenshot this morning, we've got Mr. Herman and Kay Ike from our staff. We've also got Kyle Postupak from the Joint Rail Authority assisting us with the audio visual. And Mr. Stover is just popping on to the call. And Mr. Keel is also logged into the call. Lauren, you're representing, well, you are here with Mr. McLaughlin representing Union County. And then other participants we have logged in on the call. We have Michelle Brummer, one of our consultants under Open End, with Gannett Fleming. We have Mr. Watts representing McCormick Taylor, a consultant team that we've worked with in the past. Sal Vitko has introduced himself from our neighboring MPO in the Watts area. We also have Elaine Stouter from SEDA-COG, our communications manager. We introduced Mr. Brenneman from the Senator's office this morning, David Juba with Rabbit Transit, Dwayne Gogler with Larson Engineering, and Kathleen Brady with Peters Engineering. Is there anyone on the call that I haven't mentioned that would like to introduce themselves? All right, then hearing none and noting that we verified a quorum at 9:34, I'd like to call this meeting of the SEDA-COG MPO to order. So we make this the third hybrid meeting. Just as a reminder, the meeting is being recorded. We'll hit on a housekeeping issue there in a moment. For voice votes, we are going, for most of the votes this morning, we're going to ask for abstentions and nays first, and we'll count the motion as passed if there are none in those categories. Steve sent out a link to the advanced packet earlier in the week. We do ask that we mute your mics when they're not in use, and that when you are giving a motion, you take just a second to introduce yourself, the same when you're asking a question, so that we're attributing things properly. So with those notes, the housekeeping issue was just regarding the recording from the November 19th meeting. We have an issue where we weren't able to cover that, so we won't be posting that on our website. And thank you. I guess I'll call out for those of you on the call. We have been joined by Mr. Calusi from Mifflin County in the room. So that brings us up to item B, public forum. I'd ask at this time if there's anyone in the room or on the call for the purpose of providing comment on an issue not listed on the agenda. All right, then hearing none, we'll move on to some of the business items. First is item C, the approval of the minutes from the November 19th MPO meeting. Those were included on pages 3 to 8 of the packet. And we'd ask at this time, are there any changes or additions that should be considered before we look for a motion for the adoption of the minutes as presented? All right, hearing none, is there a motion to adopt the minutes as presented?
So moved.
Mr. Moulter, thank you for the motion. Is there a second?
Brad Phillips, second.
Can we get one of those a little more slowly, please?
Steve Phillips.
Steve Phillips, thank you for the second. All right, is there any further discussion on that issue? Any further questions? Hearing none, is there anyone who wishes to abstain with regard to the issue of the adoption of the minutes as presented? If there is anyone who wishes to vote against the adoption of the minutes as presented, please signify by saying nay now. All right, then hearing none, we will accept that. We will count the minutes as accepted as presented. Thank you. All right, that brings us up to item D, the administrative modifications and the amendments for the TIP. There is a lot to cover under this item. So we're going to start with the administrative actions. These are the minor TIP changes since the last meeting. Then we do have a new amendment to add projects in each district. And then we will have a recap of the amendment that we asked you to consider via e-ballot in January. And we will also take comments at that time on the e-ballot process itself. So to get that kicked off, the administrative actions for District 2 are included on pages 10 to 12 of the packet. In a brief review of that, the things that jumped out to us at the staff level were that we added funding from central office for the Clinton County Rail Trail project. We saw an increase in funding to the covered bridge repair in Juniata County. And we also saw several projects adjusted for low bid costs. It's a very brief amendment. There's really a lot more information included in that. If you've had a chance to look at those, does anyone on the call have questions for Mr. Schultz regarding the amendments for District 2? All right, then hearing none, is there a motion to adopt the administrative actions as presented?
Jim, Brad Kerstetter, so moved.
Brad, thank you for the motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Sean, thank you for the second. Are there any questions or further discussion? Then hearing none, if any members would like to abstain on this issue, please note so now. If any members would like to vote against the acceptance of the administrative actions as presented, please signify by saying nay now. All right, hearing none, we will count the administrative actions for District 2 as accepted as presented. That brings us up to the admin actions for District 3, and those run on pages 13 to 17 of the packet. Again, just flipping through these at a very high level, We saw that there was design funding added for several of the projects that they will complete with department forces. We saw a shift in funding flavor on several projects, and we may come back to that discussion later. It's all intended to maximize the use of the funding that's become available. We'll call out that there was a shift of funding for the 339 project. This is a project that starts on 339 in District 3, but extends into Luzerne County. And we've moved the funding for that portion of it onto the tip for Columbia County. And then we also saw a shift of the construction phase for the Danville Levee Trail to 2024 to match the anticipated let date. So those were just the highlights we saw coming through. If you looked a little bit deeper and you have any questions regarding that, this would be an opportunity to ask those questions of Mr. Rank. Are there any questions on the changes presented? All right, then hearing none, do we have a motion to accept the administrative actions for District 3 as presented? Sean, thank you for the motion. Is there a second?
Mike Hampton.
Okay, we're going to take that one as Mr. Moulter, since he was in the room. It sounded like that was that Frank Hampton jumping in online?
Yes.
All right, we have you listed as guest on the call, so thank you for jumping in there to help us realize that we've got you online. All right, so with the motion and the second, if there are any members who would like to abstain on this issue, we ask that they state so now. All right, hearing none, if there are any members that wish to vote against the adoption of the administrative actions as presented by District 3, we ask that they signify by saying nay now. All right, hearing none, we will accept the administrative actions as they are presented. Thank you. Now, moving forward, much of the tip changes, the amendment on the e-ballot and the administrative action changes, and then the amendments we're about to talk to now are driven by the funding included in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So this was passed in November. It happened since our last meeting. Among other things, this act reauthorized the Highway Trust Fund, and it added a wide variety of new funding programs. While these are terrific opportunities, the timelines for taking advantage of some of these funding streams are short, and the guidance is still being developed. Particularly for us, the bill includes increased funding for major programs on the tip, and that's what we're showing on page 18 of the packet. There are significant increases for the NHPP, the Bridge Off Federal System, and the Highway Safety Improvement Program. Plus, there is a whole new bridge improvement program that's distributed using similar formulas. Even though we were about a quarter of the way through fiscal year 22 when the act was passed, it included funding for fiscal year 22, and the projects using those funds have to be let by 9/30/22. So that is, those concerns are what's driving an awful lot of the fiscal changes that we're talking about today. The districts have tried prudently to capture the funding for 2022. So the strategies that we're seeing include shifting funding on a project that might be using STP or state funds where it's eligible for the new funding. So our example for that was the SR 1001 improvements in Clinton County. Where they can, they're accelerating eligible projects that were a few years out. So our test project for that would be the 104 bridge between Snyder and Juniata County. It does include developing some new projects that can be programmed and constructed quickly. So the SR 120 lighting project that was included in the e-ballot amendment, or the preservation projects on the major river bridges in District 3 are examples of that. So that's kind of the big picture of what we've been trying to do and what's pushing us quite so hard on the development of these amendments. With that really brief introduction, Mr. Schultz, can you take us through a very quick summary of the TIP amendment for District 2 that starts on page 19?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Jim. On page 13 or 19, you will see the infrastructure line items. These are the funds that Mr. Saylor was discussing, BRIP, NHPP, BOF, and safety HSIP funds. Those are being added to the TIP for 2022. Moving on to page 20, the funds that are being utilized for IIJA on our additional projects or on our current projects, as Jim mentioned, these are being fast-tracked. This causes additional funds or current TIP funds to become available for other projects. What we see on page 20 is that Big Fishing Creek on 64, bridge preservation, and bridge over Norfolk Southern Railroad in Juniata. Those funds are becoming available for other projects because you will see in later charts that the IIJA funds are being utilized to support these existing projects. Moving on to page 21, we have Roushtown Creek and a use or available funds, federal final design funds that are being made available to a project, a construction phase project. They will be supplemented with the IIJA funds. On page 22, you will notice the distribution of the IIJA funds for bridge improvements. Those go back to, as previously mentioned, Bridge Fishing Creek #3, Big Fishing Creek #3, bridge preservation, Roushtown Creek, and the bridge over Norfolk Southern Railroad. On page 23, we have IIJA BOF funds. These funds are being distributed from the line item into projects of need. And as Mr. Saylor mentioned, we'll be advancing funds into the 2022 year, which will free up and make available 2023 and 2024 funds for other project interests. On page 24, we have the NHPP use. And the district identified a project need with the highway lighting, Paul Mac Boulevard highway lighting, and is fast tracking this project. The NHPP IIJA funds that are available in 2022 will be utilized towards the construction phase of that project. On page 25, we're examining the BRP funds, the bridge improvement funds from the previous page. Utilized the available funds, but did not fully utilize. There were funds that were remaining on the line item. The district identified 2 additional projects: a bridge preservation project for painting over 3017 in Mifflin County, and an epoxy surface treatment that will be placed onto, I believe, multiple structures within Juniata County. And moving down to page 26, we get into the safety funds. We were able to utilize both the IIJA safety funds and remaining reserve line item safety funds on the current TIP to fully fund a high friction surface treatment interest in Mifflin and Juniata County, multiple locations for that project there as well. And I believe that completes the District 2 slides.
All right, so are there any questions for Mr. Schultz on the amendment for District 2 projects as presented?
Hi, this is Katie. No questions, but I just want to comment that it's really wonderful to see all this happening. I was just wondering, is any of this big infusion of funds going to be supplementing the retroactive reimbursement program for local bridges?
Mark, do you want to jump in there, or do you want me to take the first stab at that?
Yes, Katie. What has happened is that as we move into the draft 23 TIP, moving into fiscal year 2023 in October of this year, we will have a retroactive line item reintroduced onto the SEDA-COG tip for District 2.
Oh, great.
At this time, we were able to identify funds that will support retroactive interest in 2023, 2024, and 2026 at this very time.
That's awesome. Thank you for all your hard work on behalf of Clinton County.
Not a problem. The efforts of SEDA-COG and bridge prioritization, everyone that's involved in this call and on this committee has really brought this to the forefront as a priority and a need for the region. And we're happy to help support that.
Any other questions for Mr. Schultz?
Jim, based on that comment and how this act was done at the federal level, are we expecting an infusion in future years like this that we'll have more time to plan out how the money will be used, or is it all coming right now?
So the changes that you see today on the tip and then these amendments have come through, the amendments today in the e-ballot, that's all to capture the fiscal year 2022 funding, because that's the first set of deadlines. There are increased funds, and it's shown on the chart on page 18. I think to the extent possible, we're trying to capture that as we go through in the draft tip, but there is a little bit more time to think about how we're addressing that and how we're handling it. So it's not quite as fast moving, but when you're putting a lot of what you're seeing now is, in order to use the 2022 funds, they'll put a design phase on the tip now, because that can move by the end of this fiscal year. Well, future year funds might be going to program that construction phase. One of the difficulties on the back side of this is that the IIJA only covered 5 years. And that's a really short window to move a federally funded project from a concept through obligating construction. So I think that guides the type of projects that you're seeing. That's why, for instance, in District 3, you're seeing the preservation projects on the major river bridges rather than going through and doing a whole rehab on that. So is there more time? Yes. Is it significantly more time? That's a harder question to answer. You're going to see some of the efforts to program this on the draft tip further down the agenda. And certainly when we get to the staff report under the UPWP, that's one of the things we specifically want to ask today, is if there are priorities that the members want us to be incorporating in how we look at these new programs. This process is, when you look at it, some of the discretionary funding programs, some of the things that are coming through, they're new funding programs, they're new uses. The funding windows are coming up very quickly, and there isn't a tremendous amount of time for project development. So I don't think we have the luxury of just waiting until the window opens if we're going to try and advance a major project. If you've got something that's been coming together at the local level, if your municipalities have been reaching out to you, how do I get projects queued up for this? I think we need to kickstart that discussion now. And I don't want to hijack the agenda. I kind of pictured us getting into that further down today, but we do need to hear from the members if you've got priorities that you want us to be working on, so that it's reflected in the way these funds are spent out. All right, so we've had a couple of questions about the amendment for District 2.
May I ask Mark another question?
Please.
Okay. Mark, this is Mark Lucy from Mifflin County. I do see that you're advancing the construction dollars for the Valley Street project into 2022. Could you potentially have the project manager on that project get a hold of me sometime after the meeting? Because I want to see that some of the variety and diverse comments that were made at the public meeting were captured in the final design.
Absolutely. I'll touch base with the project manager immediately following this meeting.
Thank you.
All right, are there other questions for Mr. Schultz? Then hearing none, do we have a motion to adopt the amendment as presented?
I'll make the motion. Katie De Silva.
Katie, thank you for the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Calusi, thank you for the second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, if there is any member that wishes to abstain on this issue, we wish that they state so now. If there is any member that wishes to vote against the amendment as presented, please signify by saying nay now. All right, then we will accept the amendment as presented for District 2. Thank you.
Just a real quick procedural question for Gene Proshniak, since we have you on the call. Since we went through those list of amendments with a single vote, is it okay to go through the electronic SIP approval process with one submission there? Or would you like to see separate sheets for all these amendments were included? Do you have a preference on that, Gene? Maybe didn't unmute. Just for the members, that's kind of a thing. After the amendment votes are approved by the MPO, we have to go through PennDOT SharePoint system and do an electronic STIP approval process. So then they get reviewed by the program center at PennDOT and Federal Highway Administration to make sure that everything is appropriate with the funding types and the amounts and that type of thing. So we'll go through that process. We can confirm with Gene afterward. But I think in talking to Carrie, we were going to try and do individual submissions of these amendments, but the single vote here covered all the District 2 amendments that you see before you. Sorry, Jim, thanks.
That's all right. All right, with that, Mr. Rank, would you be willing to walk us through a similar summary of the amendment for District 3?
Yes, good morning. Jim, can you hear me?
Coming through loud and clear, yes.
Very good. Okay, starting on page 27, very similarly to what Mark did in District 2. At first, we're taking the new bill funded funding and adding it to our traditional line item for each category. Moving on to page 28, in this next amendment, we are converting state 185 funds and federal fiscal years 22, 23, and 24 for the 104 bridge from state to BRIP, and we're moving all that funding into federal fiscal year 2022. This gives us adjustment and ability for other projects to be added and or adjusted using these funding, using the state funding in later actions that are coming up and amendments that are coming up, and also as stated before, to help us fund the retroactive bridge reimbursement on the 23 tip. Moving on to the next page. This is actually just an action, but in this action is where I took a look at what we could best do with the funding as far as advancing our BOF program and advancing our NHPP program and utilizing these new funding. We also had a couple increases for a couple local bridges, and we covered them again with this new funding using BOF funds. As far as the NHPP funding, it was basically like using a paper towel in a river. It just soaked it up real quick on one of our 80 projects. But then again, that released funding the out years that we could then go use on other projects on a 23 tip. talking about the BOF program just a little bit again here, we looked what we could feasibly move ahead, especially with the local bridge program. And then again, that had a ripple effect on the 23 tip update. So we were able to move other phases for the local bridge program up as well. Moving on to the next page. So we utilized what we could of the BRIP. We still had a remaining amount left over. We then looked what we could feasibly do and let within the 22 year, we still had a little bit left over. So we then said, well, what could we start? And then, you know, let within a 5-year period. This is what you're seeing. It's basically 1, 2, 5 projects, 2 of which we will let, we are going to try to let, but I think we will be able to let within this 22 fiscal year, and the rest we'll be letting later on the 23 tip. The one thing I will point out is we were only allowed to put the 22-year BRIP funding on. We could not show the 23-year funding. So to get these out year phases shown, to allow us to program the phases we wanted on the current tip, we basically had to reduce other projects and utilize their funding for these phases. I will say though, when the 23 tip is approved and when it is adopted, that these projects will be fully funded. There will be no reduction. And then finally, moving on to the last page, the last amendment. This is where we looked after we utilized the BOF as much as we could. We decided to add 2 new projects utilizing BOF funds. And again, what you're seeing is the pre-construction phases for them. And again, we wanted a final design phase on here. So we're showing the construction phase for the 4020 over Green. Any questions?
All right, if there are no questions for Mr. Rank, do we have a motion to accept the amendment for District 3 as presented? Mr. Moulter, thank you for the motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Sean, thank you for the second. Is there any questions or further discussion? Then hearing none, if there are any members that wish to abstain on this issue, we wish that they state so now. If there are any members that wish to vote against the amendment for District 3 as presented, we wish them to signify by saying nay now. All right, then hearing none, we will count the amendment for District 3 as accepted as presented. Thank you. All right, this brings us up to an amendment, to a recap of the amendment that we asked you to consider via e-ballot last month. So a summary of the amendment is included on page 32. We do provide a summary of the results of the vote. That's on 33. 16 of 17 voting members voted, 15 voted in favor. So the motion measure passes pending confirmation. Several issues were noted in the comments as the e-ballot process was completed. The first was a concern that we were conforming with the Sunshine Act. And the second was a concern that this format did not provide an appropriate opportunity to consider the other projects for which the funding might be utilized. So at this time, since the comments provided were more about the process than the actual projects, we are going to ask for a confirmation of the votes already cast. And then we're going to segue into more of a discussion about the process. So following that, we will call for the vote from the chair. And again, if there are any members that wish to abstain, we please ask that you state so now. If there are any members that wish to vote against the confirmation of the e-ballot, please signify by saying nay at this time. And if there are any members that wish to vote in favor of confirming the e-ballot, we ask that you please signify by saying aye at this time. Aye.
Aye.
All right, we did run that slightly differently, but hearing that there was a audible voice vote for the ayes and not for the nays, and there were no abstentions, we will count the e-ballot motion as confirmed. So thank you. So now to get a little bit into the discussion about the process. The last time we considered an e-ballot was back in 2013. And when we went back and looked at this, we noted that nearly 2/3 of the voting members have been appointed to the MPO since the last time we conducted an e-ballot. So it does look to us like we lost the consensus that we had on the issue of how we would handle those as the members have changed. To get the discussion started, we've got a couple things loaded into the packet. The first is a summary of the discussion from the last round, and that is, we've got that on page 35. We start with the discussion. And from our viewpoint, our advice from PennDOT, particularly PennDOT CPDM, has been that they've long held that e-ballots are not in violation of the Sunshine Law. And because of the discussion that arose around this, when we considered an e-ballot in 2013, we confirmed that opinion with an external expert who had done work on the subject for CCAP. So we did summarize that. Again, the 3 points that were called out in that consideration was that the procedure was compliant with our bylaws and the public participation plan. The action was confirmed at a regular public meeting today, and that members were given a reasonable amount of time to consider the information. Second, to take this a little bit further, Steve on our staff reached out to 7 other MPOs to ask about how they handle e-ballots on an ongoing basis. And we got mixed results coming back. 4 of the MPOs we consulted don't use them. 2 use them somewhat regularly, and 1 authorizes them but uses them only rarely. 2 of the MPOs out of the 7 that we contacted indicated that because of the way they're formed, they've reached an opinion that they are not subject to the Sunshine Law requirements. We do not have such an opinion for the SEDA-COG MPO, and rather than delving into that issue, the discussion we've had with our own administration comes down to we may or may not be subject to the Sunshine Law, but we see no good reasons for proceeding as if we are not subject to it. There's no reason why we should not comply with those regulations. So with that introduction, do any members wish to provide comments or to ask questions about this process? Mark, please.
You made a mention that there's 3 primary points. Does it comply with the bylaws? It will be confirmed in a public meeting, and is there a reasonable amount of time to confirm or to review? Seems to me that item number 3 is extremely vague. How do you define a reasonable amount of time? Because I'll say this, I didn't even participate in that particular vote because I didn't know it was going to happen, because all the communication was via email.
Mm-hmm.
And I just missed it.
And the bylaws, what we call for is at least 5 business days to submit the vote. Whether it was going to be like phone, fax, email. In this case, we had 7 business days. So that's how we determined, and following the bylaws, we even went a little bit above that. But I don't know if there's any official like statewide or federal direction on a reasonable amount of time, but that was, I guess, Sherry Walls' opinion that there was a reasonable amount of time allotted with what was referenced in our bylaws.
Would a longer time period help?
Well, just for the simple fact that if you're not getting the 100% of the voting members confirming that they are going to participate, could there potentially be follow-up with those members to see, hey, we didn't hear from you?
We don't get 100% participation at our regular meetings.
and we take action on tips. We make votes. We make determinations right here in this room, and we may not have 100%. I don't know, Mark, if that's a valid point.
Yeah, but these meetings are, we know when all these meetings are. What I'm saying is I didn't even know there was going to be an electronic vote.
Did you not receive the emails, or did you just miss it?
I missed it.
Yeah, I don't know if we need to spell it out, particularly like Jim mentioned, there's enhancements to our process, the bylaws, public participation plan is upcoming. So we can revise that kind of thing. And certainly as individuals, we could follow up with a direct phone call. There were subsequent emails sent out to the people that we didn't hear from, I think 2 or 3, but we can certainly make a call to get full participation to pursue that. But we certainly had a quorum and we had a vast majority in favor of the vote. So we didn't really question the process in terms of that, but yeah, we certainly do outreach and make phone calls to try and get 100% participation.
I would appreciate that.
Sure.
Jim, I guess I'll just comment on this process. We haven't used it. And what you said last time was 2013.
I think the last time was 15. The last big blow up was 13.
Okay, so 7 years ago, we had an email vote. So I'm not sure it's worth investing a lot of time in it. I mean, personally, I do have some reservations about the sunshine law. Nonprofits are not subject to the sunshine law, so their bylaws can say email voting, but our county solicitor has held the position that county commissioners, planning commissions, all of our authorities at the county, we are not allowed to do email votes of any kind that violates the sunshine law. But somebody has to challenge it. And so you can run afoul of it and still be okay if nobody challenges it. So that's the other side of it. So does it really matter, I guess, which way we go?
Well, and that is one of the things that I look at this. It seems, a lot of the issues that we reach out to other MPOs on, there's pretty firm consensus. In this case, not so much. There seemed to be a rather wide variance in opinions, and just the idea that you have organizations saying that they are or are not subject to that. That is, that's a level of legal advice that we as a practicing group haven't gone to. So
we are public. Our meetings are open to the public, right? We can't have. Are we allowed to have these meetings and not have them open to the public? I guess would be.
I don't believe we are. I believe that we have to have our meetings open to the public. We can do things like conduct an executive session where it would be appropriate. And I think that would be an alternative in this case. With the effort that we go to, we don't just send the survey and the email out. We conduct a conference call that gives everyone a chance to ask questions. The timeline would have played out a little bit differently, but we probably could have conducted that as a virtual meeting if we'd allowed enough time to advertise it as such. And in that case, all right, the plus side is it's really clear you're in compliance with the sunshine law because you've advertised it, the public can participate. The downside is if some of our members miss it, we might have a much harder time getting quorum on that virtual meeting. So maybe there's some processes that need to go along with that where, geez, one of the things that happened here, usually we only go 8 or 9 weeks between meetings. We went, I think, 13 weeks between the November meeting and the February meeting. So it fell at just the wrong time. Now, in the past, we started scheduling more meetings to see that happens less frequently. That's why we don't do as many as we used to. But
when is the next update? We update that participation plan every year.
We're doing it now. That's what Steve was talking about earlier, is that we're working through an update. So this would be an opportunity to consider that. And, if nothing else, at least provide a written policy over how we handle it so that there's not, we don't have to re-educate ourselves once every 7 years.
That kind of good. There goes my idea. I was hoping to punt it until we update the plan again.
That might have helped, yeah.
I like your thinking. I really do. Would it be the time to incorporate possibly ensuring that you have either acknowledgement of contact when doing an e-vote? If you've got a certain number of members and you have acknowledgement from each one that they have either received or will not be able to participate, you've covered your bases in that manner. At least then we know if Mark had gotten it or not.
Yeah, I still think we have, this is Eric Staley. I still think we have an issue with the public participation end of things of the Sunshine Law. I was very concerned about holding a vote like this. While I didn't have any problems with the projects, I don't want to run into a situation where we don't provide enough opportunity for public comment under the Sunshine Law. And then, what happens if we're challenged and then, it's already too late. Projects are underway. We're playing with significant amounts of money here. And I just don't want to get jammed up on this.
This is Katie. I agree that whatever the email policy turns out to be should be put in writing and part of the bylaws. But I think in this particular case, we're talking about our federal government deployed this funding as a rescue plan. And the idea was to get it out there and get it working. And it's the case with every other funding stream, non-transportation funding that I'm dealing with, that the timelines are shortened, the deadlines are shortened, and everybody's acting faster. So in the case of this particular vote, I don't see how anybody could make a valid challenge to what we did. But I agree that for future, it needs to have a longer timeline, better opportunity for public comment.
The Sunshine Law, Katie, doesn't say that you've got to follow the Sunshine Law unless time is short, and then you don't have to follow the Sunshine Law.
Yeah, that's true.
Hey, Jim, it's Sal from Watts MPO. Can you hear me?
Yes, Kyle's been flagging me down with the chat, and my vision is bad enough that I can see just enough to know it's from you, but I can't see a darn thing what it says. So please,
that's okay. Just to add some, I guess, perspective to this from what Watts does here. So we have in our bylaws the process clearly defined as how we're going to hold an electronic mail ballot or a phone ballot. We give the 5 days opportunity for members to review that. And as far as the public comment piece that's been brought up here, when your agenda goes out, you have public comment at the very beginning of your meetings, just as we do, and also the agenda items. So for instance, we have 2 e-ballot items on our upcoming meeting here on February 28th. And the very next step in that process is in the public meeting to reaffirm the e-ballot vote. We clearly state what those votes were for. For instance, we have one coming up for a TIP amendment, and then one coming up for the dates for the technical committee on the 28th to reaffirm both those e-votes.
But the vote's already been taken at that point, though, Sal. It's what hypothetical situation. If you get it, you take an electronic ballot that gets approved. You come to the MPO meeting to reaffirm. Say you have public comment at that point that sways the decision, and it's not affirmed. What do you do then?
So I think that the issue here is we're using vote, and I would suggest maybe we call it a poll, because the vote is not finalized until the reaffirmation is confirmed. It's basically
so then why do it?
A free vote. Well, because you still need to give time for the members to read all that information, and so going into the meeting, it's more of a procedural issue at that point.
Right. Well, the information's already sent out a week before the meeting, and if you're going to hold a vote at the meeting anyway, why do you need to do the electronic vote or the electronic poll in that case?
I would suggest that it's for ease of process, and also the discussions happen there. And as we mentioned earlier, some of these things are very time sensitive. If you don't have a way forward at that next public meeting where you're reaffirming everything, things could get delayed. We've reached out to our solicitor, and every indication we've had from them is that we are complying with every law that we have to comply with, and there is not a concern on their end for some sort of opening for a lawsuit or something like that.
Jim, this is Sean. I think Eric, and I agree with Eric, I think this does run afoul of the sunshine law. This has been litigated in Pennsylvania. Email votes have been shot down by the courts. There is case law out there on that. And this brings up another point now that was just raised that I didn't think of before. What does happen if you have this email vote and then it comes to the meeting and the vote changes? Those members get new information. They decide, well, you know what, maybe this wasn't a good idea. When the public's there and the vote swings, then what do we do? Because we've already told the district, oh yeah, we did this email vote, you can go ahead. Might not be a likely scenario, but it could happen. And what does that open us up to? I never even thought of that.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, like any kind of expert or attorney or judge, then the courts have also upheld essentially this fix. Not that we want to pursue this, but where it's reaffirmed, not to say that the vote could change, but reaffirming what was done electronically, then it does pass muster. I think that's been upheld as well. But I think, as Jim said, I think we're fixing the process as we revise it. So there's a subgroup that wants to review it, would be if there's an emergency case like this, things have to be advanced quickly or something needs to be addressed just in a rapid fashion, that we would put it out to the members, notify them of the virtual meeting, be the quickest route, kind of like we're doing now, we're Custom Link Central. We would advertise it to the public. It's an open public meeting. They can participate, ask questions, and we can make every effort, see if there's email responses directly or to make phone calls to all the voting members to ensure we're going to have a quorum and hopefully as close to maximum participation as we could. So I think that, and that's what we've heard from some of the other MPOs that run into either the solicitor reviews or just their own staff level reservations on the sunshine laws, that they think calling a meeting like that, advertising to the public, is the best, most efficient way to make sure it's compliant with the sunshine law and also allows these projects to advance. One of the things here that happened was, Jim mentioned the 2022 funding. There were some staffing issues at District 2 and consultant needs and getting these projects advanced, designed quickly to maximize these funds that need to be obligated quick and have the let dates before October. So that's kind of what spurred, and like Jim mentioned, we had 13 weeks between meetings, so that became a little bit of an issue. Other MPOs where they meet monthly or say 10 to 11 times a year, there really isn't a chance for something like this to come up because there's going to be a meeting quickly enough to have that official vote occur in that. But the virtual meeting advertised to the public, it's on our website, it goes out to the daily item, and hopefully that enough time is provided members they can participate in the meeting and vote. As part of that would be our pursuit. If that seems navigable for the members, or we can work on how the actual wording is, but that would be the way I think we resolve this, hopefully.
Here's a question. SEDA-COG itself, we're under the SEDA-COG umbrella. SEDA-COG's Council of Governments. Does the SEDA-COG board do email votes? Do we know?
I am not aware of a case where they have done an email vote in the last 13 years. But as Steve mentioned, they meet monthly as opposed to bi-monthly. So there is more frequent conversation. And that's been part of the conversation as well. I'm not a legal expert.
Hey, Jim, it's Sal again. I can, from Watt's end, I mean, we've done, we meet at least quarterly, and we've done a number, especially, during COVID, we've done a number of e-ballot votes. Like I said, we have 2 coming up here, and we've done more last year. There has been no concerns or issues raised from anyone on the Watts board, either technical committee or coordinating committee, that were in violation or not following an open process with our business that we conduct.
And my point is, this is really no different from any government activity. City councils, you know, they don't have their discussion of what they're going to do in front of the public. They just say what they're going to enact in front of the public and then give the public a chance to comment. The public doesn't really get in on every conversation. And same with commissioners.
There's a difference
with the
between
ARPA funding, the commissioners were awarded funding and put out applications for people to apply to. They make the decisions of what gets awarded in their offices, and then they announce them publicly. So as long as you're announcing and declaring your intentions publicly, like we're doing right here at this meeting, and then ratifying them publicly, and you're covering your sunshine law obligations.
Jim, I wonder whether or not we might be saving ourselves some heartache if we make the documents that need to be reviewed by electronic vote available on the webpage. You might have already done that, so I apologize if I'm ignorant to that. But you know, there's a source that you can point people to, generally speaking, and even in your annual announcement of the meeting minutes, or excuse me, meeting dates, you can state information that typically meeting documentation is supplied on the webpage. Now, I understand that some of this information wouldn't be supplied, but at least there would be a standing opportunity for people that, I mean, let's face it, you're not going to have, you know, a cake baker interested in providing comment most likely on most of these things. It's people that are knowledgeable about the whole process that would even provide any comment. So if you at least get them coached to an opportunity that if they know there's opportunity to go to a specific website all the time to look for documents available for review, it could be just like a storing house for that information, so people might know that that's a good place to look at things to review. Because then you're not necessarily saying, hey, the public didn't have an opportunity to see what we're looking at. They know there's a place to look at these documents.
Yeah, right now we put electronic packets on our MPO webpage. I think if we call this virtual meeting, we'd do the same thing. We put the agenda there. We put the packet that would contain the materials related to the vote right there on the website, where it has the MPO meeting information.
Like prior to the meeting, you're saying?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hey, Steve, it's Sal. We do the same thing here in our public advertisement. We advertise where you can find the documentation. It's on our website, the packet, the agenda, and when we use our social media promotions, we point everybody to the website as the main resource to be able to find that information.
Maybe a way around this is terminology. Maybe maybe we do call it a poll of members, and then we take the actual votes taken at the meeting. It's not the actual decision, but you know, 16 members come back and say on the poll, yeah, we're okay with this.
And is that enough certainty for the district to move forward with things like advertising projects?
Right, and the vote's actually taken and confirmed. Maybe that's the way you skin the cat.
Less time doesn't work. I think that might be redundant. If we get special meeting advertised and the members participate in
a special meeting, if you don't want to go that route.
Okay. Thank you.
You know, I think Steve, that solution certainly would meet all the legal parameters if you went that route. I'm just looking for another option.
Is there a process to submit comments electronically?
There is a comment page on the website, but it's not particular to specific votes. So, but it does, and this gets Kyle was able to post one of the comments that Frank had made, that all that's required for a vote is to be able to document that you have a quorum. It doesn't matter what forum you are. So, I mean, this is something that we probably could delve into it rather deeply. PennDOT's been exploring the idea of different formats for their public meetings, where it's a meeting room that's open over a period of days. All the information is available. And because of that, you might not be able, with COVID restrictions, to go to this public place on a Tuesday night, but somewhere over a 2-week time period, you can log into the website and see this information. So that might be another terminology issue where we always think of a meeting as something that happens for an hour or two on Friday mornings at this location or the SEDA-COG offices. If we're defining our public meeting as an online event that extends over a week, the information is posted. You have an opportunity to participate, to provide comments through a bespoke comment page, and to register your vote as a member. If it's publicly advertised, I think we could make an argument that that is compliant with the sunshine process without having to find a block of time where all 17 voting members can participate together. It's certainly getting out into some new territory. So I want to credit Frank for maybe giving us something to chew on in terms of an innovative solution with that. But we'll put our heads together and come back with a draft policy that we think we can include in the PPP. If we end up a little bit more conservative, I think we'll go towards holding the more traditional virtual meeting format. And if we think we have legs on this, maybe we'll explore that, or at least leave the door open for that kind of ongoing virtual meeting, taking advantage of the new forums. Wow, that's not something I thought about before this morning, and I don't want to let my mouth run too far in front of my brain. So
I would just caution that if you're going to accept that opportunity, that there's a way that people can identify who's making comment, because you can be getting comments from Saudi Arabia. Who knows? If you have it open up the entire internet, who knows who's going to provide comment?
it does open the group up to sway from a much wider audience of potential participants who may be outside of this. Wow, it gets back to the definition of we conduct a 3C process for the residents of our planning area. How open is it intended to be for people who are outside of that planning area and not represented by it? Wow.
I just mean from the simple fact that you don't want it necessarily be anonymous comment.
Yep. So it has to be moderated.
Right.
What's our troll guard? Yeah. All right, well, that gives staff good guidance of where to go. And to summarize this, we'll have to go back, we'll have to listen to this again and make sure that we're not running away with the latitude that you've given us in the comments. But it sounds like you're advising us that we do have some latitude in how we meet the sunshine law requirements, but that there is interest in the part of the members in continuing to meet the sunshine law requirements. So we'll bring a policy back that we feel addresses those needs, but still allows us to move forward without waiting 13 weeks when it's required to do so to carry out the process in an effective manner. All right, so that is most of where we were trying to get under item D. There was just a couple of other highlights. Page 37 includes a list of the projects that have been approved by the MPO for consideration against future funding. The only one that's changed since the last meeting is Industrial Park Road in Snyder County. The cost estimate has been updated. There was an increase there. We have been working with the SEDA-COG CDBG staff and economic development staff and the sponsor on that to try and move that project forward to discussion. So I guess the update would just be that we're seeing good developments on that, but it's not ready to go to construction yet. So we'll continue to carry it on this list. Are there any questions then under item D of the agenda? Then hearing none, I'd like to pass the microphone over to Mr. Rank. If you could provide us with an update on the CSVT progress and if there are any pertinent updates on the SR 54 safety project.
Thanks, Jim. All right, starting with the northern section for CSVT. Here comes the big news. Late summer, we will be opening up the Winfield interchange, and coming from the southern end, as you're driving 147, just past the Montandan exit, we will start pushing the southbound traffic over into the northbound lane. And then basically about the time you hit Acorn Road, we'll have southbound traffic back into the 2-lane southbound lane, in which everything will be south. Everything will be 2 lanes from there all the way to the bridge, all the way to the Winfield interchange. And the northern section will be open. So at that time, please note that State Route 147 from where 405 ends in West Chillicothe Township to State Route 61 in the city of Sunbury will not be 147 anymore and will become State Route 405. Also, with that, 147 will, of course, be the new opening section of the CSVT northern section. And where it ties in with 15, that will be 15 147 until it reaches 61 in Shamokin Dam. That will be 61 147 across the bridge over to Sunbury, where then it will pick up where 147 currently is, south to Harrisburg. And then jumping ahead to the comments I know I'm probably going to get, discussion on how to commemorate the opening are in very early stages at this point of the district, and any planned activity and event will need to be approved by the new district executive, which brings me to the next update I have with the whole district is Sandy Tosca retired last Friday. Right now, Justin Blakeney, who is the ADE for construction, is now the acting DE for District 3. So until we get a new DE, really any final plans and any events for the opening will need to be approved by whomever is selected. I'll take any questions on the northern section right now. All right, moving on to the southern. The first contract for the earthwork for southern section has been advertised, and we anticipate to let the project at the end of March. But if we have a lot of questions or any comments, in regards during the advertisement period that we need to address, and we can address by the March let date, we might move it out a little bit so we can make sure all the contractors have all their comments addressed. And that's the only update I have for the southern section. Any questions on that? And then finally moving on to the 54-642 intersection improvement project in Montour County. We're still wrapping up final right of way. We should have that, I hope, by the end of the month. It's been tough kind of nail down some of the right of way areas we have and some of the alignments that we're doing adjustments on. But from what I'm gathering from the last meeting, that this should be done by at least early March. Then we can move on to our right of way takes and then get our final plan submissions done. We're still looking on track for the May let in 2023. And any questions on the 54 project? Okay, Jim, I think that's about it.
All right, thanks, John. That brings us into item F, the Unified Planning Work Program update. So the staff report begins on page 39. Again, this is what we've been up to on the staff side since the last meeting. A couple of call outs from that. We are continuing to work on the budget transfer from fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 2021 for the current UPWP, or 21 to 2021, 2022, to get that correct. We have continued working with the steering committees on the Hogan Boulevard and SR 522 Connect studies. We're about 2 meetings into each of those processes. From the staff side, they seem to be going well. Thank you for the groups that are participating in those studies. Definitely what's powering that is the stakeholder input. We did share draft candidates for potential studies to be conducted with SPR funding that we would apply for under the UPWP at the November meeting, with the idea of getting member input on that. Since the November meeting, members have brought 2 candidates forward. We've been talking with Montour County on a trail connection feasibility study that would interact with the SR 54 safety project just discussed. And we've been talking with Mifflin County about the idea of a capital improvement plan for their locally owned bridges. So drafts of those potential studies are included starting on page 50. We do view the Montour study as supplanting the 2 candidates that we shared at the November meeting. We shared some priorities that we thought were hot for that area. Greg came back with a more in tune view of what's most pressing. So we have corrected to that, and that's what we're attempting to move forward at this time. We are going to continue to develop those, as well as the more regional economic development and transportation study. And we're going to hope to submit those to central office as the window opens later this spring. It's a really good year if we get one of those. I don't think it's reasonable to expect that we would get all 3. So we will keep working on those and refining those and keep you updated on them. We are participating in a work group in Clinton County that's looking at the establishment or the feasibility of the establishment of a designated stop system to be operated by the STEP program. So we're excited about how that's coming together, and the investment of the local stakeholders in that has been very heartening. We'll also be sharing and have been sharing information about the new microtransit stop hopper service operated by Rabbit Transit in the Sealands Grove area. And we're going to circle back to that under item I. Hopefully we can get Mr. Juba to update us on that a little bit. We did provide comments on the statewide highway safety improvement plan. We can provide a summary of those if you're interested, and we can keep you updated as that plan is completed. And I guess at this point, I'd like to pass it over to Steve. If you could update us on the TA set-aside program, a little bit of a summary about the Title VI and public participation plan update, and the comments on the multimodal fund candidates.
Sure, thanks, Jim. I'll take since we came off the heels of our earlier discussion, I'll talk about the public participation plan first. As we mentioned at prior meetings, we've been coordinating with PennDOT on an update to the limited English proficiency plan for the region. And as part of that, it was turned over that the Federal Transit Administration now really just considers that plan an element of the larger overarching Title VI program. And the same applies to the public participation plan. So we're trying to align these now, make sure they're consistent, get them on similar update sequences. So the LEP plan was essentially done. We just have to do a little bit of translation on some of the vital documents that are considered appendices there. So we'll be working through that process. The public participation plan, we've noted several things that need to be updated for current practices and legislation and guidance, things of that sort. We'll get to reflect some of the virtual involvement and participation we've been doing recently, other tools and techniques that we've been applying, online resources, things of that nature. We'll ensure that that's up to the current standards and practices. And then the larger, as I mentioned, Title VI program, there's specific checklist items there that need to be completed and followed to satisfy the federal requirements. So we'll do that. That work's ongoing. We've had a chance, as Jim mentioned, with our work program to bring Gannett Fleming on board to help us with some of the public engagement and some plan edits, maybe some specialized mapping or other features that they can bring in as part of that and to better engage the public. So we'll advance that. As MPO members, we'll look to have you as part of a forum to shape the public participation plan in particular, but all of these that we're going to be updating. There'll be a chance for special interest groups, focus groups to be held. There'll be a public meeting, a hybrid meeting with in-person or virtual participation. So that'll be advancing here quickly, and we're going to try and hopefully get that considered with the tip update cycle so that they're compatible and we can potentially leverage the advertising periods as well in the same public meeting. So more to come. If you have any questions, reach out to us anytime, but there'll be forums here with the MPO members, and there's going to be other public outreach to help us to make sure the documents are reasonable and reflective of where you want to see us working with our public activities. The TA set aside, the normal kind of things are there and the reporting on the existing projects. But for the new round, what we've learned is there were 96 projects submitted statewide that are being considered. I think about $100 million requested for those. The statewide committee's been meeting. They had a couple rounds, close to finalizing their recommendations for the applications, including the 5 that we had considered as an MPO and commented on. So $18 million is still what we know is in play. Guidance has been rolling out from the federal infrastructure bill, and it's not finalized for TA set aside. But the assumption is that we'll have a slate of projects ready to go if that amount, say, doubles or whatever it ends up being beyond the $18 million, that projects will be selected from this solicitation to fully utilize the TA set aside funding. But hopefully we'll hear soon the results of that, and this spring, we'll get formal announcements from the governor's office and from PennDOT on those applications. And so in your packet, you do have the normal reporting there, and it's great. From that 2018 round of TA set aside, 6 of the 7 have either been completed or under construction. We just have the North Branch Canal Trail Levee Top Trail project in Danville Borough. It was on our earlier administrative actions with kind of having to extend the funding out a little bit on that for the let date for that project. That's the only one that has yet to be advertised and under construction. So that's great progress that we've made in the last 3 to 4 years on the 2018 round, and we hope to see some projects selected from the 2021 round as well. Any questions on the public participation plan or TA set aside before I head into the multimodal? Okay, if not, on page 48, we have comments on the 5 applications that were submitted for PennDOT's fiscal year 22 to 23 multimodal round. You're limited to 750 characters, so that's why we don't have too much text there on those. But the 5 applications, we thought they all seem very well done, or we've either had touch points with them in the past or we're familiar with them all for the most part. But we went through and provided those comments you see reflecting how they're consistent with regional plans, some other things that really address safety or land use, economic development that we could reference there. I have the actual applications with me if you have any questions on that, if you haven't seen those as county members from your municipalities. But if there aren't any changes or comments on what we have before you after the meeting here, we'll go ahead and submit those officially in PennDOT SharePoint system, and those will be considered by the statewide committees as they review those and approve the multimodal grants as well. So any questions about the multimodal for PennDOT?
Steve, we have a comment from Mr. Brummer. Says, do you or Mark Lucy want to mention the Mifflin County ATP that's getting underway?
Sure, I'll defer to Mark if you want to talk about the active transportation plan and where that's headed for Michelle.
We had a workshop to let people in the community know about that particular plan. We don't have an active transportation plan in Mifflin County right now, so really happy to work with PennDOT Central Office on that. The consultant is on board. The contract was approved in December, and we anticipate having our first steering committee meeting on February the 22nd. And we expect that we might even have the draft plan. We just had a scoping meeting just a couple of days ago. We probably might have draft by the time September ends. So it's going to be pretty fast and furious, but we're excited about it because one thing to note for people, particularly in this room, is one of the sub-consultants on it is Gannett Fleming, who formed and worked on the consultant side of things for the Middle Susquehanna bike and ped plan. So we're trying to mirror some of the processes and final document style and things like that is what we have here. So just kind of make it more parallel so it fits in a little bit better with that. So I'm excited about that project. And there's quite a number of non-motorized transportation projects we have brewing in Mifflin County. So it's really important to get good, legitimate feedback. And the good thing is the municipalities seem like they're showing a good value in this and participation. So the public participation and the key stakeholder interviews is going to be vital to that. So thank you for that, and appreciate working with, I know, Jim and Catherine specifically on being able to participate with that. So thanks.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Mark. Thanks, Michelle, for bringing it up. And just to piggyback off that, we did, through LTAP, then sponsor an active transportation class here at East Buffalo Township last year. And we have one now in the books. I think it's early part of May at Derry Township in Mifflin County. So realizing the work and activity you're putting into that, and that hopefully municipalities will be able to come out to that half-day session. It really goes through the process of developing an active transportation plan and how to better serve those needs and get activity and to have those addressed within municipal level, taking the state and federal guidance and applying that locally. So that's on the books for early May. We'll get the LTAP newsletter out here in February, and then flyers on that. If anybody from the larger MPO wants to attend, you can certainly follow up with me and let me know. But that's scheduled, and we'll get into the active transportation committee a little bit later here on the agenda. A couple updates, reports on that process. And then the new federal bill, there's a lot more focus on non-motorized users and vulnerable users. So we should be seeing hopefully more attention on that, and realizing that the fatality and serious injury numbers have been rising of late, and especially for pedestrians. So hopefully counter those issues. Anything else from the work program staff report, Jim, you wanted to hit on?
Yeah, I guess I did want to hit on, so starting on page 60 of the packet, and this ties, or 59 of the packet, I guess, there is a quick list of some of the funding opportunities under the IIJA that are intended to be available to local governments. And this is just the, kind of the discussion that we wanted to highlight earlier. There's a wide variety of programs here, everything from, the RAISE and the infra programs that are, new iterations of very intense, but very well funded nationwide competitive projects for major transportation projects. There's also some new things like the charging and fueling infrastructure grants, particularly the Safe Streets and Roads for All. One of the webinars we attended mentioned that up to 40% of that planning could go to the development of local safety plans. So that's just, from what we've seen, a completely different approach and a completely different way to handle that funding stream. So what we wanted to do was make sure that we were getting some of these programs in front of you, so that we know that some of the funding windows are opening very quickly. If there is something that you feel is of great interest regionally, something that you want the MPO to be lending, some of our ability to pulling an application together, we need to hear that input from you early in the process. Otherwise, I do have great concerns that we would not be able to put together a well thought out fundable application for some of these. I know that some of you in particular, there's been a lot of uncertainty about one of the headline items under the IIJA is that it includes under the Bridge Improvement Program a small set aside that can be used to fully fund local bridges. So you've been getting outreach from municipalities. Well, how do I get my bridge on that list? Outside of our regular every 2-year updates, we don't have a process and an answer for that. And if this is something that you want us to specifically consider candidates for that opportunity, we need to have that conversation as quickly as possible. I mentioned earlier some of my concerns about this, that that it's hard for any of us to navigate the federal process for more involved projects. And I think that trying to get a local bridge project through that process frequently presents some very particular concerns. But there may be opportunities here, whether it's looking at either some of our highest volume bridges, bridges that are owned by multiple municipalities in partnership, or if it's the idea that, you know, maybe the projects that fit for this type of program are faster moving, so they're limited to preservation efforts. Maybe we could look at preservation projects on the longer locally owned structures. Those are the type of things that it might be possible to accomplish, but we need to start that discussion as quickly as possible. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to move these projects through the process in time to meet either the funding windows or the obligation deadlines. So that's the introduction. Are there any comments or questions from members? Is there anything you'd particularly like us to pay attention to or dig in on? Mark, please.
I do know that the Center County MPO folks were keeping me in the loop with that. Forget what they called it. It was an innovative way to look at the environmental clearances for the 322.
The planning and environmental linkages study?
Yes.
Yeah.
So considering there's a considerable amount of federal dollars potentially available, is there an opportunity to work with them, at least generally just staying coordinated with them? Because certainly that has a major impact to Mifflin and Juniata counties to see that project completed. So, I mean, certainly I'm going to do my own interfacing with them on that, but I don't know if this might be an opportunity to look at, you know, looking at additional funding for that.
All right. Mr. Schultz, I hope you're taking notes on that.
I did capture that, and I will follow up on that with others.
I think they're close to finalizing that PEL. It's called Planning Environmental Linkage Study. And I don't know when the next Center County MPO meeting, I think they have one this month. I don't know if it's a coordinating committee or their technical committee, but I know they have regular presentations on that, and they copy us on their meeting materials. So if we see something of note that maybe you're not seeing, we could, you know, feed it out to you, or we do usually just have an interest item in our reporting here for these packets. Yeah, if there's websites or things like that to share, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of interest in completing that for safety and efficiency's sake, and more than likely it's going to continue in some fashion, but we'll see what the alternatives are and what's recommended.
All right, thank you.
So Jim, these are all off-tip programs that are competitive basis that you have listed here. Is that
The list of 25 there, yeah, those are the competitive ones that
I don't think they're going to be formulary programs.
Okay, and so I guess this is going to just depend on every municipality to apply. Do we have any role in looking at the long-range plan and looking for projects that are sitting out there or been sitting out there for a while that we haven't had funding, and telling folks that aren't in this room, hey, maybe you should be looking at this?
Yeah, I guess I'd offer up maybe for Katie to comment on some of these. These are major, you know, intensive application processes that are listed here for the most part. Some of these other things like Jim was mentioned for the bridge formula program would be a little bit different, but in this factually, so it's 25 competitive ones like the RAISE, you know, the old Tiger grant program, things of those nature. They're unfortunately really intensive application processes, and they're hard to compete at. I know they're trying to refine or revise some things and make it, you know, easier for underserved areas to qualify. But
people could contract with SEDA-COG for that assistance, right? Seriously, if SEDA-COG does grant assistance to local government, so would that be an opportunity for somebody to get assistance?
Depending on the project and the capacity, yes. And there are other groups that provide that service as well. But I see what you're saying, you know, do we have a role for that? And man, the one that jumped at me, you know, maybe it's that Safe Streets and Roads for All, depending on what the guidance looks like for that. Several of the projects that we have listed in the long-range transportation plan are more general safety concerns. So what you'd be talking about here maybe isn't being able to program HSIP funding for the solution, but you could maybe get them moving down the path of a planning grant to identify what the solution is and get it in for future consideration. So potentially, yes, there is a role there. My concern is that we're probably, with us trying to blue sky it, we might not catch everything that you're thinking of. So if you've got things going, if you've got people reaching out to you, if you've got things going in your area, we need you to make us aware of those and bring us to the table. And it goes back to, it's kind of the process that's happening with the SPR funding requests. We shared our first thoughts of, okay, this is what we're thinking of doing if nothing else comes up. Greg and Mark jumped in. It's like, well, how about you look at something a little bit different? This is a little bit closer to what we're thinking of. That's what we need to have happen for us to actually be addressing the needs that are landing on your table. So again, this is just that first toss out on the table. This is what we think is coming down the line. We know there's other stuff. I don't know what the PROTECT program is going to look like for resiliency. I know Kerry's been interested in it because he's pointed out to us that, hey, both your districts, you have an awful lot of rock slides. At the same time, we have whole departments and groups at SEDA-COG that work with resiliency from the flooding standpoint. So are both of those viable interests, or are there things that we're just totally missing that should supersede both of those? I don't know. We need you kind of, I guess the point with discussing this is that I think the windows for this, I think there's going to be a lot of them, and I think they're going to come up really fast. So we've got to be looking ahead. And maybe another example is the borough of Lewisburg has been reaching out to us about the idea of finding funding for a charging station. And maybe it's a fit for one of these programs. Maybe there's something else that fits.
That was my next question on the charging infrastructure. I'm getting those same questions from Lewisburg, and the most recent one was, is there any kind of plan? Is there a statewide or regional plan for this infrastructure? Is it just Sheets is going to put some in, a hotel is going to do it, and some municipalities? Is there any coordinated plan for these charging and fueling infrastructure systems, or is it just everybody doing their own thing?
Well, there does seem to be a state plan looking at the clean fuels corridors. And so Lewisburg was able to attend one of the seminars or one of the webinars about that. And the downside of that is that to date, they've just been focused on the interstates. But in one of the planning partners calls, they mentioned that they might be willing to look at, maybe the next tier of roads down and consider their first corridors that aren't interstates. And the two they threw out on the table were 322 and 15, both of which cross our planning area, one of which runs right by the borough of Lewisburg. So I think that's an action item for us that that we need to reach out to central office to see, all right, if someone's going to nominate those corridors for this level of planning effort, what's that look like? And, does it match with the kind of opportunity that the borough's pursuing now, or are they way out in front of it? And then also just trying to connect with our adjoining planning areas in those corridors and see if it's on the radar. So we're in the early stages of those calls, but I mean, that's kind of your poster child example, because that's one of the earlier program windows to open up. And we're trying to run this out and do the legwork. I have concerns that we're going to get to it quickly enough to actually help the borough pull a competitive application together. So it's one of those where, wow, if we can find someone else that's moving a little faster and knows a little bit more about this, let's get these smart people talking to each other and see if we can pull a project together. But if we don't know what's out there, we can't make those connections.
I guess on that one, I'm looking at that more long-term than for this competitive window, just to see if there's a strategy that's being developed. So it's not just some hodgepodge, like our typical land use planning is in Pennsylvania, some hodgepodge approach.
Unfortunately, I think, while there are those state-wide plans that look at the clean fuels corridors, I think there's a range of issues that we need to be getting into at the local level. I think the legislature is struggling with the impact that's going to have on the fuel tax. And wow, when we had the update to the long-range plan, this is one of the things we heard about from the human services side that, one, how do you roll these technologies out in a way that's equitable? Two, in some ways that's already starting to happen. Katie, I think, was the one that threw out that some of the rent-to-own places up in their area now provide things like e-bikes on a payment plan. So where you might not be able to go out and buy a car for a reasonable payment per month, you can get into something like an e-bike. And that's more likely to be the first interface with some of our population with an electric vehicle than, certainly, there's a population that's going to buy Teslas, but it's not the majority. And I don't think we're capturing some of those needs that the service groups are seeing in the areas of the groups that they advocate for. I don't think we're capturing it and keeping up with it. So yeah, is there some planning out there? Is there a framework? Yes. Does it serve all the needs that we see? No.
Yeah, James.
Hi, this is Jeff from Pennsylvania. You hear me?
Jeff, I see.
Yeah, Jeff, go ahead.
Okay. Just to add to what you were saying, Jim, about human services groups and the bipartisan infrastructure plan earlier, is there any interest from this group in terms of addressing the Amtrak needs at the Lewistown station? I appreciate your updates, because that is one of the priorities noted there. And also ADA compliance locally, like community mobility. Some examples are like the Renovo and Lock Haven projects that you mentioned in the current today's meeting agenda further down. I'd be curious to get any feedback on addressing those two areas, the Lewistown Amtrak station and ADA and local community mobility projects. Thanks.
Mark, can you share anything?
This is Katie. I could talk about the Lock Haven and Renovo, the application for the park and ride there. People who live in Renovo, which is very remote from everything, it's a small community, drive to Lock Haven and park at the top of Hannah Park, which is right near Lock Haven University. And it's been informally there for years and years, and they're trying to develop it into a real park and ride. And our community action agency STEP is considering a kind of a modified shared ride shuttle service for the general public. And they were saying they may include that as one of their stops so they could take people to appointments to work from that park and ride. So that is definitely a strong interest for Clinton County. And that's all I got on that.
Okay, just to be clear, I was using those as examples that you already have in your report of things that you could do, but I'm sure there are lots of other communities in the SEDA-COG area that might have interest in community mobility issues. But I'm just kind of wondering how you see funds from the bipartisan infrastructure plan possibly at addressing some of these needs in other areas. Thanks.
Yeah, I guess, Jeff, I don't know that I have a top-down answer for that. I think there'll be opportunities that come through that. Again, as we see particular opportunities to address those needs bubbling up from the community, that's what we're asking for members to bring to the fore early in the process, so that when there is an opportunity to address that with some of these funding streams, we get started on that early enough to have a competitive application. Lisa, I believe you were going to jump in with a comment there. Did I have that correct?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. It's Lisa with the town of Bloomsburg. So about 3 years ago, there was state funding for these charging stations, and we looked into it. Sounded really good that we would get this grant for the equipment. And then at that time, just the monthly cost to the town, depending on whoever would use it, we just couldn't make it work. So I would just kind of tread lightly on that, because I would agree that maybe not everyone's going to be gearing up for that type of transportation. But also from a municipality standpoint, I don't think we can really risk, spending $500 on that service when we're not getting the fees to offset it, because it's all based off user.
Lisa, would you mind if we shared your information with the borough that's reaching out to us about that, so that they have the opportunity to talk with you and benefit from what you've worked through?
Yeah, Jim, I'll send both you and Steve an email then.
Thank you. All right, so then in terms of input, we have a couple things to look at. A recommendation that we look at this through the lens of the long-range transportation plan. As funding opportunities come up that we think are viable, that we start referring those to potential applicants. And again, beyond that, I would ask that as you see projects starting to take shape in your area, as you are getting information about these, please don't be shy in reaching out. And we'll probably touch base on this again at the April meeting, just to make sure, it doesn't sound like we have consensus that we should approach this in an organized fashion. You're clearly not asking for a subcommittee to address these opportunities as they come through or identify candidates. We will touch base to make sure that what you're thinking and what you're looking for from us doesn't change over that time period. Feel free to reach out to us between now and the next meeting, if you have the opportunity to think on this a little bit and come up with something different. All right, if there are no questions, Mr. Herman, item G.
Real quick before I get into that, just wanted to reference it on page 58 as the normal reporting we've done of highway occupancy permit activity within the region for the past few meetings now. And just wanted to mention, in addition there, we did now add the traffic impact study application activity toward the bottom there of that page as well, the separate table at the bottom. So where we've seen the TIS applications come through to hold scoping meetings or review those and see if it needs to have a full-blown TIS. We have those registered now there as well, and we'll continue that. So if you're not seeing those as county planning directors, if it triggers anything, feel free to let us know and reach out to the district traffic units as well on those. But that's one addition to that roster. And now on to the 2023 12-year program update. Briefly, I'll just touch on a couple items here within the packet. Page 67 is where we have kind of that snapshot at a glance summary information on the draft tip projects, and then some graphics and charts there as well. So we talked a lot about the new federal infrastructure bill and the impacts. I won't delve into all that here, but suffice to say that this draft tip is nearly $100 million more than our draft 2021 tip when it was prepared and put out for comment. So you can see the impact of that sizable federal investment, about $100 million more for this tip. And it contains 265 projects worth that $474.4 million amount. And what we have now, and shown in here in the packet, the individual new projects, but there's 92 new projects with a breakdown there, 42 being roadway, 46 bridge, and 4 new safety projects. You'll see the carryover information. There are a few line items, minimal, but there's 4 line items on the draft tip projects. And if you look at the CSVT, we can kind of see the outsized impact of that on our overall amount. That's $153.4 million for advancing the CSVT and primarily the southern section work that will be being put out for bid, as John mentioned here, very near term for the earthwork and the ongoing activities there with the highway construction and the Casino One connector and other aspects of the CSVT. Right now, we're looking at, for the tip comment period, we would bring the draft back in April for the MPO for consideration advertised to the public. That's our April 8th meeting. There'll be a few changes, more than likely, from what is currently in the packet, as we see some of the maybe funding swaps occurring or as there's reviews done by Federal Highway Administration on the draft tip. If we need to alter some things with the funding types and so forth, we'll do that, but hopefully there'll be pretty minimal, minor changes and what you'll see for the April 8th meeting for consideration. But that's when we look to get a motion and approval to advertise the tip for comment. Right now we're looking at May 9th as the public meeting date, more than likely as a hybrid to allow this opportunity for those who want to be here in person, and others just, their schedule dictates or other preferences for doing an online virtual participation, they can do that, or the phone line. And then as we would move forward with the timeline, June 10th would be the MPO meeting where we would look to have approval, adoption of the draft tip. And as it carries throughout, the state and federal reviews later in the summer, and then it would take effect for October 1st. So that's kind of the schedule. I know we've touched on a lot of this in prior meetings, and kind of the main, items to reference here would be some of the stats and then the actual project listings to see if there's questions from the members. So page 68 is kind of those snapshot graphics. I will mention that a couple changes just came. This is based off of February 1st, and there are a couple slight modifications that had happened since then on some funding types and the address some of the amendments we considered earlier with the federal infrastructure bill money. So it's not the most current, but it will bring back the revised version for what you see in April. It shouldn't be sweeping, but there'll be some minor changes here. So we show again the impact of the CSVT with your top graphic. About 68% of the funding is for other projects, but the CSVT occupies 32% of their overall TIP funding. And the northern section money is essentially off of that, other than some of the improvements that will be occurring at Ridge Road in Northumberland County. The remainder is all essentially in Snyder County. We show the project phases, and most of the money is going toward construction, but we have all those final design, right-of-way utility phases, and preliminary engineering captured under the pre-construction, about 16% for that, 84% construction. Then we show a breakdown of the roadway projects and the amounts there. Projects by status, again, that 92 new projects, 169 carryover, and 4 line item. We break it down, drill down a little bit more by type. The main ones that we compile here is roadway, the state bridge, which occupy the vast majority of the number of project types, and then the local bridge, either carryover new projects. We have 21 of those. 9 safety, primarily safety. There might be some safety elements in some of the other resurfacing projects or bridge types that are on the tip, but more fully designated safety projects, there's 9, and there's 1 TA set aside project that will continue on this tip. And then you see the funding by type, majority for the roadway resurfacing, reconstruction, the micro surfacing projects that we're seeing a lot to address the asset management needs on the tip. State bridge funding, next one down, 145 million, and then the approximately 23 million for local bridge and 21 million for safety. The biggest chunk of that is for the State Route 54 project from Montour County that we talked about earlier, those safety funds. And then the TA set aside money of 1 million for the Danville project. Funding by county, if you look at that, again, we see the outsized influence of CSVT. That's why Snyder County has that $138 million tied and related to CSVT. And then the other funding being $32 million. You see the other breakouts by county there. And then we show you the new projects by county bar chart at the bottom of page 71. And that's by type. And then we get into page 72, the listing of those 92 new projects organized by county. And again, there'll just be slight modifications here, based on some of these reviews of the draft tip by the Federal Highway Administration. And we'll reflect that for what we bring back in April. But the vast majority of that should be carried forward for what you see for advertising April 8th. Next in the packet, we have page 75 is our typical 11 by 17 project listings, organized by county again as well. And there's a few things that aren't reflected here. Some of the discretionary money that occurs statewide will probably be included as we get those. There's been interstate decisions and some other statewide discretionary dollars being meted out. Some of the rail grade crossing projects, I think, are still to be determined and finalized as well at this stage. But the statewide interstate tip and 12-year program was just released February 8th. So after we had prepared this information and shared the packet. So those things are rolling through the processes, and we can report those for what we get into in April and some of the additional supporting documentation. If you have questions on that or what needs to be advertised to the public. So I'll largely leave it there before we can, again, touch briefly on some of the other federal infrastructure related funds that are shown in the remainder of the packet. But are there questions about the draft tip, projects you see before you? Any questions either for us as staff or for PennDOT on some of the specifics or particulars? If not, I will thank you all for your participation throughout. As Mark Schultz had mentioned, the activity with the local officials and the counties as we have our prioritization meetings is key and important and helps to shape and influence this process. And we'll then get these additional funds to hopefully grab a hold of those and deliver on those in a rapid order. So thank you again for all your participation throughout. If you think of anything after you review these, feel free to let us know. Otherwise, again, we'll look at April 8th meeting to get the approval to advertise the draft tip for public comment. And then we'll march toward June with the adoption vote. And really thank the district staff, PennDOT, their collaborative process and working through all this. And there's been a lot to manage with the complexities of this new federal infrastructure bill and what that meant, and finalizing the tip and getting that out there. So within the packet, page 87 is just where we show some bullet points that PennDOT had prepared. And PennDOT really got out, in advance of this with some stellar work because, formal guidance was a little bit delayed in coming out just with the bill being so new. You see bullet points there on the amount of funding for Pennsylvania on the bridge formula investment program. And as like Jim alluded to, the off-system bridges with the potential of 100% federal funding there for those that are on local roads or rural minor collectors. And then there's implementation guidance. I know some of you have seen this through some other offices and reference that as well, but the actual Federal Highway Administration guidance on the bridge formula program starts on page 88, and PennDOT did a great job of summarizing those main bullet points on the earlier one. And then we also have in here primary bullet points on the overall act from PennDOT on page 95. They're included. And there's still, some guidance to be finalized on some of the new discretionary programs. So as we get that, we'll work to share that out with the members, and you can have that information to work with as well. And some of these new programs that aren't, the typical ones that we see carry over each federal bill. Bottom of page 96 is the overall Pennsylvania funding summary. You can see 2.3 billion extra dollars as a result of the infrastructure bill that's passed. It depends on what you want to call it. If you want to call it the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act or the bipartisan infrastructure legislation, we'll let you use the term and lexicon that you like. But then when you factor that bridge investment program, the actual total increase to Pennsylvania is about $4 billion over 5 years. So we'll see a lot of upgrades and improvements as a result of this, and appreciate all the work that you put into identifying the projects and working with your municipalities to take advantage of the resources. So any other questions about the 12-year program or the funding and projects listed? Okay, we're looking at 11:23, so I'll carry on into agenda item H. This is the Active Transportation Committee update, just a verbal. There's nothing in the packet for you, but just I'll mention we had the Community Engagement Outreach Work Group meeting. That's a subcommittee to the overall committee on February 3rd. We had a lot of great discussion on some of the outreach activities that are underway, discussion on a new committee logo and comments and input on that. There'll be another version come around from the designer, but there'll be a logo for that committee to help with some of the branding. And as there's letters sent off on behalf of sponsors for projects and grant applications or other information and flyers and marketing materials. So the logo is being finalized and an overall branding guide for the committee. If you recall, the committee did help to put together a bike safety passing magnet or decal. It was more specific and included the information that was official Pennsylvania law, to give 4 feet to bicyclists when you're passing them. That magnet's been shared and it's out, across the community within the region. And there's interest maybe in taking that further. Other groups across the state to piggyback and use that. They really like the look of it and the format and what it puts out there for public information and education. And the full committee meeting will be on February 16th. So next week, those of you that are able to participate, we'll look forward to seeing you on that hybrid or that Zoom meeting. And as part of that, there's going to be a guest presentation from a Philadelphia area attorney. That's of interest to you. He's going to talk about bicycle crashes in particular, how to avoid them, number one. But if people are involved in them, what to do with reporting, types of insurance programs that are available, some cycling policies that can be developed to enhance safety. So that'll be good. We'll look forward to that guest presentation. And Catherine Wild should be back for our April meeting. She's been out on leave, but she'll be returning, and we'll be giving these kind of updates in the future and work with you, certainly Mark, with the active transportation plan that you're developing. So that's our quick update on the committee. Any questions on that? Or if you're not on the committee and you want to participate in future meetings, just feel free to let us know. Shoot us an email and we'll give you the login information for those. Okay, I think we're on to the member forum then, Jim.
All right, not too much under there. Our items of interest to members is included in the packet as always. Probably the big thing we wanted to highlight here is that if you're not aware, since December, there has been a micro transit service operating in the Selinsgrove and Sunbury area. And we are fortunate to have Mr. David Juba with Rapid Transit on the line today. Dave, is there anything you want to say just to introduce that service or help members understand what it is, what it provides, and what it can do?
Absolutely. Good morning. My name is David Juba. I'm the planning manager at Rapid Transit. So the microtransit service, we launched it December 13th of 2021. That is for those that aren't familiar with that service model, the microtransit service model is primarily focused around on-demand zonal-based service, or at least that's how we've approached it. What that means is essentially between 6:30 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. Monday through Friday in the zones we operate, you open an app, you call into customer service, you walk to a designated walk-up location that we sort of lay over vehicles when they're not busy. You have access to that vehicle on demand, as the name incurs. A little different from the traditional modes that people might be familiar with, like paratransit and fixed route. So paratransit traditionally has like a one-day call-ahead situation to book trips and schedule. And fixed route, at least at this stage, has not been deemed feasible in the immediate areas that we're trying to focus on. So it's a nice middle ground opportunity to fill a need, and that's how we've promoted it in the South, where we operated in York County, as well as what we're calling the northern microtransit zones that you're going to potentially be seeing in the near-term future. So to keep it short in mind of time, the Sunbury Selinsgrove service had launched in December, as noted. That is the first of 3 potential zones that we're considering operating up there. We've been surprised with the positive engagement and feedback we've gotten from the community, as well as ridership. And just to give a sense of volume there, we've serviced, I believe it's about 429 riders over the prior 4 weeks, a little over 650 total riders since December 13th. And it's hovering around 21 riders per day serviced. And that's a very quick growth comparative to some of our other service models. So we've been very happy to see the need and the services providing something the community is interested in. Again, happy to answer questions or go into a little more detail. Again, mindful of time, I will pause and open up for questions.
Yeah, David, I have a question. You had mentioned right now you're in one of the 3 areas. Can you explain what the other 2 areas are going to be?
Yes, so the three areas that we requested departmental approval of service for, or through PennDOT, are the Sunbury Sealands Grove, which is in operation. There is a Lewisburg Milton zone that will potentially be in operation in the next 2 to 3 months. Again, the timeline is sort of contingent on driver shortage and driver availability. That's sort of the big piece of the puzzle right now. So could come faster. I can't give a definitive timeline. And then the third zone of operation is a Danville-Bloomsburg service, which is a little broader of a service, which will probably operate an extra vehicle for capacity purposes in that area. But again, designed primarily to connect those two communities and offer a service that had, to my understanding, there was some historic service provided there as well as a definitive need. And we're, again, very interested in the opportunities those areas might provide for the public.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Thanks for the update.
Yes, thank you.
Mark, please.
Just have a quick question. That sounds like a great service. Are there, you mentioned those places for people to be able to wait for the ride? I mean, are there not like bus shelters, but are there like safe places for people to wait to catch the ride? How does that work?
Yeah, so from a traditional mindset, in York, we have designated locations that are in line with our fixed route system. So convenience there is that we do have shelters and means of sort of keeping people out of the inclement weather. From the northern zones, the designated areas we are using currently for our layover or terminal sites are shopping centers. So primarily like an Aldi's, a Walmart, a grocery store, whatever the case may be. So more that's, again, sort of the designated location. So the hope would be that those individuals are able to stay out of the weather, because there is the sort of accurate depiction of the time. You know a general window of, say, a 5 to 10 minute period that bus is going to be there for you if you call into customer service. If you have the app, you can see the vehicle coming towards you as it's on your trip. You will get text or some sort of notifications as it arrives for you. So we do have methods to encourage and protect the safety of those individuals. As the service expands and as we might get partnerships into the future, there's definitely an interest in more structure or infrastructure in relation to the service if it is of interest. But at this stage, there's not anything definitively built by the organization.
Thank you. Are you doing any contacting for publicity of these things through the human services or planning departments of those areas that you're setting up your service?
Apologies, that was sort of quiet. If I heard the question, it was in relation to reaching out to local community organizations and planning groups. Is that correct?
Right. County level human services is one of those agencies where most of your transit folks hook up for scheduled service. They could probably help you with the coordination and also the publicity of getting that information out.
Yes, absolutely. And we've been making efforts to reach out to the individuals that we're familiar with in the area. Those who know Rabbit Transit probably know Rich Farr. He's been fairly engaged with local planning partners, including human services organizations, to my knowledge. As we progress, we are more than happy to engage in deeper conversations with local planning partners to encourage the growth of that service. But again, we do encourage and solicit feedback in terms of partners. So always happy to have those conversations.
Thank you.
And Beth Neidham, if you recall her being on some of these past meetings, had shared some flyers with us after the Sealands Grove Sunbury, and we shared that out to human service organizations in the region. And as these others come online, if we receive those from Beth or David, we'll make sure we forward those off as well to you and human service groups and try and really see this grow. It's impressive to see your numbers here so early, David. So thanks for reporting on that.
Oh, absolutely. Again, greatly appreciate the time, and should have people have interest in reaching out or coordinating, always happy to receive that information. Love brainstorming, engaging the community. So again, thank you for your time.
Thank you, David. We do have a couple groups that are definitely interested in talking to you about this service, so we will be reaching out to you. Thank you. All right. As part of the member forum, is there anyone else on the call that would like to provide an update on activities within their organization, upcoming opportunities, or other issues they wish to make the members aware of? All right, then hearing none.
Hi, this is Jeff.
Jeff, please go ahead.
Yeah, from Pennsylvania Silk. I just wanted to echo what the gentleman from Rabbit was saying on driver shortages. I know they've mentioned that in not just in their region, but we've heard it from others across the state. Allentown, where Atlanta is, and Berks County, where BARDA is, and so that's an issue. We're not sure if any of the bipartisan infrastructure plan dollars could, or if there are other funding they can use to address driver shortages, which are pretty much restricting a lot of the some of the transit trips to more medical trips, and other trips tend to go on other days, at least for some of the paratransit, like persons with disability, PWD shared ride or senior shared ride. So, but that's an issue that's not unique to this area. Thank you.
CDLs are very hard to come by right now. So if any of you know people that would be looking to potentially become drivers and have their CDLs, feel free to send them off to Rabbit Transit or others.
All right, any other comments or information? Then at 11:35, we will consider this meeting of the MPO adjourned. Thank you for the time. Thank you for the input, and we'll talk to you again in April.